Perhaps one of Sittingbourne's best remembered shops was the department store that stood at the bottom, the eastern end of the high street.
It will be remembered not just for the things it sold, but for its connection with the town and the community, which was surely felt by the management and the staff and the buying public. Directories in the 1820s and 1830s show George Tong in business here, working with his father John. John Tong and Son, grocers, linen drapers, tallow chandlers and maltsters. At the time of the 1841 census, George was in his 30s with a wife Alicia and young family living with him over the shop, along with assistants and servants running the grocery and the draper's shop. Shop premises in the High Street had been bought in the previous century by John's father. In the 1850s, George Tong took on a partner, Harry Greenstead, a Borden native, who had worked for the family in the grocery for more than a decade. The firm's name was changed to Tong and Greenstead, but Harry Greenstead died before the end of the decade. By 1861, 29-year-old James Hulburds, a Maidstone man, had arrived. The business was renamed again as Tong and Hulburds until George Tong retired in 1868. Publicity in the 20th century boasts of a Hulburds business that started in 1785, but this must be referring to the Tong family business, of which James had become a part. In 1865, James married Esther Payne, daughter of the Sittingbourne brewer. James Hulburds was a canny businessman, and the shop prospered, expanding to fill the shops, now numbered 7 and 9. He lived at the house next door, number 11, with his family and 4 domestic staff. He employed 10 shop assistants, of whom 8 lived on the premises. Some of the ladies who patronised the store may well have come carriage shopping, remaining seated in their carriages whilst staff brought goods outside to show them. Journalist Billy Matthews remembered Mr. Hulburds as always courtly and dignified, and yet pleasant withal, taking a personal interest in all his customers. During the 1870s and 1880s, James Hulburds had another partner, John Arthur Clark. In addition to the grocery and drapery, the business now offered services such as ladies' outfitters, dressmaking, millinery, and they were a wine and spirits merchant. They were also undertakers, but the malt house was mentioned no more after 1874. Over the years, Hulburds' staff numbers grew. 30 years after James's arrival, the census lists the housekeeper and 13 shop assistants living on site. In the 1890s, James Hulburds was comfortably off and able to stand back a little from the day-to-day running of the shop. He and his wife Esther had moved away from the High Street, first to Bell Road for a time and then to 13 Park Road. He remained very involved in Sittingbourne life, including as a magistrate and as the parish clerk of St Michael's Church opposite the shop. He was also the first chairman of Sittingbourne Urban District Council in 1895 to 96. It is certain that John Clark had long left the business by 1901, when James Hulburds' son George had moved into number 11 with his wife Lucy and extended family, when number 7 was the draper's shop and number 9 the grocer's. James Hulburds died in 1908, aged 76, but the business continued to thrive under George Hulburds' guidance. George and his family lived next door to the shop until 1922. Not too long after this, the old gas lamps which hung outside were removed, as electric lighting became available. George Hulburds, like his father, took an active part in the life of the town and served on the council. However, he suffered long-term ill health, having been knocked down by a horse in his 40s. He suffered with increasing paralysis and moved to Tunstall in 1922, eventually selling the business to Reginald Rex Boucher in the early 1930s. Rex Boucher, with the help of his uncle Comyn Ching of Bredgar, bought Hulburds in 1932, retaining the name which was of course well known in the town. The house at number 11 continued to be used for residential purposes, and the Bouchers lived on the premises just as the Hulburds had done, before moving to a house at the top of Ufton Lane and then on to Milstead Manor. In 1933, this 32-page Christmas catalogue advertised some of the groceries and wines available, as well as fashions, household goods and gifts. Soon after this, in the early 1930s, a more modern shopfront replaced the Victorian shopfront on numbers 7 and 9, and a shopfront was finally added to number 11. During the Second World War, some staff slept overnight at the store when there were air raids, presumably to watch for fires. In 1943, the grocery and provision department was moved around, allowing for the enlargement and specialisation of the drapery and fashion departments. After the war, the business prospered and staff numbers increased. A thriving social staff culture developed, and the staff played an active part in town life. Wednesdays was early closing day in the town, but for a time Hulburds was closed all day. There were regular staff outings to places such as Brighton, Eastbourne and Hastings. A carnival float was a regular feature when they resumed from 1949. Behind the shop were many old buildings, including an oast house used by staff as a paper and bag store under the charge of Alf Westcott. There was also an old salt store where block salt had been hacked with choppers and weighed to customers' requirements, later used as a staff room. There was a large building that had been used for horses and carriages and later for delivery vans, where much of the window dressing equipment was later stored. There was also a mulberry tree in a walled garden. At this time, the general manager was Don Ayres, and Frank Gisby was the office manager. Grocery manager was Harry Belson, and Eva Black was in charge of the fashion department. Originally, handwritten bills were taken to be checked by the accounts cashier. A suction tube system was introduced, so that financial transactions were handled by the cashier rather than by sales assistants. Cash was put through the tubes, which went to the cashier's office. Any change was returned the same way. Purchases were wrapped in brown paper and tied with tape. Staff addressed each other as Miss or Mrs. or Mr., much like Grace Brothers. The 1950s, 1960s and 70s were peak years in the life of this department store. It was a great asset to the community, for it was said people had no need to travel further afield to buy excellent merchandise. Although still deemed a family firm, the grocery and provisions department boasted that it sold reliable quality goods, and in the fabrics and fashion departments customers found, it was said, modern and superior styles. Whenever changes were made to the building, Rex Boucher employed H. Butcher Limited, his favourite local builder, as when the store was extended at various times during this period. There was an extension to the rear of the drapery shop in 1959. In 1963, the shop underwent modernisation in all departments. The grocery and provision department had become a food hall at the back of the shop, close to where the store offered its own car park. Now people could meet in the coffee bar and restaurant in comfortable and attractive surroundings. The fashion floor had again been modernised to cater for a younger clientele, and menswear was moved closer to the main entrance for quick and easy shopping. A popular children's entertainer, Mr. Pastry, opened the extended store in September 1963. It was clear that the firm treasured its status as a locally owned and run shop. Reg Jarrett, who was the manager in the 1960s, was also president of the Sittingbourne, Milton and District Chamber of Commerce. Branches of the shop were open in Herne Bay and Sheerness in the 60s and early 70s, and a staff newsletter was put together to aid internal communication and community spirit. In 1972, the shop underwent major renovations, with much demolition and rebuilding. The new building was to be 3 stories, with display windows at ground and first floor levels. I remember working on this project as a student labourer, both in the early demolition stages and as the new shop front was installed, which is the one that remains today. A bookshop was one of the new additions to the shop. During the 1970s, Rex Boucher also acquired and developed the land at the back of the store, the site of Trot's Hall in Bell Road. He employed butchers to move Trot's Hall brick by brick, so they said, from Bell Road to a new location in the grounds of Milstead Manor, where he now lived. The Bell Centre, as he called it, comprised a car park, an office block and an arcade or tunnel of shops from the High Street and through to Bell Road. This led to the mainstay of the development, a supermarket where Sainsbury's opened in 1976. The future looked assured as plans were approved for the enlargement of Hulburds to around 60,000 square feet. However, it was gradually realised over the ensuing years that the town could no longer support a large department store. Rex Boucher died in 1985 at Trot's Hall. There was a management buyout and some departments were closed, but eventually redundancy notices were issued to the remaining staff and this distinguished store closed in January 1988. A snooker club opened on the first floor, and in 1998 the larger part of the ground floor of the old Hulburds building was taken over as a Wetherspoons pub and named the Summoner. Various businesses occupied space on the ground floor around the arcade, using the address of the Bell Shopping Centre. The Bell Centre itself and supermarket in Bell Road were demolished in 2011. Wetherspoons moved out in the late 20-teens, and today there's a dessert restaurant on the ground floor.
Of course, we don't know what the future holds for the building or for the High Street. And in 2021, the nature of retail shopping seems very uncertain indeed.
If you have found this video interesting, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit our website.